In a quaint New England town, where autumn leaves painted the streets in hues of gold and crimson, an elderly woman stood motionless before an antique dresser. Her weathered hands trembled as they clasped a faded photograph, the edges worn from years of handling. The image captured a moment frozen in time, a young mother cradling a toddler, both wearing bright smiles that belied the tumultuous future that awaited them. Sarah Thompson, now 80 years old, felt a familiar ache in her chest as she gazed at the photograph. Her voice, barely above a whisper, filled the empty room. Forgiveness is the fragrance that the violet sheds on the heel that has crushed it. The quote, once shared by Mark Twain, had become her mantra over the past 3 decades, a lifeline to cling to when the pain of abandonment threatened to overwhelm her. As she placed the photograph back on the dresser, Sarah's eyes caught sight of an envelope peeking out from beneath a stack of bills. Her heart skipped a beat, recognizing the handwriting that had once filled pages of her son's school notebooks. Could it be? After 30 long years of silence, had Michael finally reached out? Sarah's gnarled fingers hesitated over the envelope, her mind racing with possibilities. What words could possibly bridge the chasm of 3 decades? And more importantly, was she ready to hear them? The gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to grow louder, urging Sarah to make a decision. With a deep breath, she picked up the envelope, her hand shaking more noticeably now. As she slowly broke the seal, memories flooded her mind, transporting her back to a time when her world had shattered like delicate china dropped on unforgiving concrete. Sarah Thompson had never imagined her life would take such a dramatic turn. Born and raised in the same small town where she now lived, she had always been known for her warm smile and the heavenly aroma of freshly baked goods that wafted from her kitchen. Her passion for baking had been passed down from her grandmother, a legacy of love expressed through perfectly flaky pie crusts and melt-in-your-mouth cookies. But life had not always been sweet for Sarah. Widowed at a young age, she had poured all her love and energy into raising her only son, Michael. She worked tirelessly, taking on multiple jobs to ensure Michael had every opportunity she could provide. Her days were spent waitressing at the local diner, her evenings dedicated to her small home-based baking business, and every spare moment devoted to her beloved boy. Michael Thompson had been a bright and curious child, with a mischievous glint in his eyes that could charm even the sternest of teachers. Sarah had such high hopes for him, dreaming of the day he might take over her baking business or perhaps even open a restaurant of his own. But as Michael entered his teenage years, storm clouds began to gather on the horizon of their once idyllic life. The boy who once couldn't wait to help his mother in the kitchen now spent his time with a rougher crowd, staying out late and coming home with the scent of cigarettes clinging to his clothes. Sarah tried everything she could think of to reach her son, heart-to-heart talks, tough love, even enlisting the help of their pastor, but nothing seemed to penetrate the wall Michael had built around himself. Then came that fateful day, 30 years ago, when Sarah's world crumbled around her. She had returned home from a long shift at the diner, her feet aching and her mind preoccupied with a new recipe she wanted to try, only to find Michael's room empty. A hastily scribbled note on his bed was all he left behind. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't stay here anymore. Don't try to find me." Those words, penned in the careless scrawl of a 20-year-old who thought he knew everything about life, had haunted Sarah for 3 decades. She had respected his wishes, never actively searching for him, but that didn't stop her from scanning every crowd, hoping to catch a glimpse of the son she had lost. Now, as Sarah unfolded the letter with trembling hands, she felt a whirlwind of emotions, hope, fear, anger, and an overwhelming sense of love that had never diminished despite the years of separation. Her eyes, slightly clouded with cataracts but still sharp, devoured the words on the page. "Dear Mom, I don't know if you still live at this address, or if you'll even open this letter when you see who it's from. But I had to try. I've spent 30 years running from my mistakes, and I can't run anymore. I'm sorry." Those words seemed so inadequate after everything, but they're all I have to offer right now. "I'm coming home, Mom. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you'll give me a chance to explain. I'll be in town next week. If you're willing to see me, I'll be at Joe's Diner every morning, just like we used to do for Saturday breakfasts. Love. Michael." Sarah's vision blurred as tears filled her eyes, dropping onto the paper and causing the ink to run. 30 years of prayers, of wondering, of hoping against hope, all culminating in this moment. Her son was coming home. As she clutched the letter to her chest, Sarah's mind raced with questions. What had Michael been doing all these years? Why had he stayed away so long? And most importantly, could she find it in her heart to forgive him? The next few days passed in a blur for Sarah. She alternated between cleaning her modest home from top to bottom, what if Michael wanted to visit, and losing herself in memories as she pored over old photo albums. Each snapshot told a story: Michael's first steps, his gap-toothed grin on the first day of school, the two of them covered in flour after a particularly messy baking session. How had that happy little boy turned into a young man who could walk away without a backward glance? As the day of Michael's promised return approached, Sarah found herself standing in front of her closet, wondering what one wears to reunite with a long-lost son. She settled on a simple floral dress, the same one she had worn in that photograph Michael had always loved, the one of them at the county fair when he was 10. Would he remember? Would he even recognize her now, with her silver hair and the lines that time had etched around her eyes and mouth? The morning of the reunion dawned bright and clear, as if even the weather was celebrating this potential reconciliation. Sarah's stomach was in knots as she made her way to Joe's Diner, the same place where she had once worked long hours to support her little family. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and for a moment, she was transported back in time. She could almost see herself behind the counter, a much younger Michael swinging his legs as he sat at the bar, happily munching on a stack of pancakes. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim interior, the present came rushing back. And there, sitting in a booth by the window, was a man she barely recognized but knew instantly. Michael! He stood as she approached, uncertainty written across his face. Gone was the lanky teenager she remembered. In his place stood a man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years. But when he smiled hesitantly, Sarah saw a glimmer of her little boy. "Mom," Michael said, his voice rough with emotion. "You came." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak just yet. They stood there for a moment, the weight of 30 years hanging between them, before Michael gestured to the seat across from him. As they settled into the booth, an awkward silence fell. Where does one begin after so much time? How do you bridge a gap that seems as wide as the Grand Canyon? It was Michael who finally broke the ice. "You look good, Mom," he said softly. "I wasn't sure. I mean, I hoped you'd still be here, but..." "Where else would I be?" Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "This has always been my home." Michael nodded, his eyes downcast. "I know. I've imagined this moment so many times over the years. But now that I'm here, I don't know what to say." Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation ahead. "Why don't you start at the beginning, Michael? Why did you leave?" And so, over cups of coffee that grew cold and plates of food that went largely untouched, Michael began to tell his story. He spoke of the restlessness that had consumed him as a young man, the feeling that their small town was suffocating him. He talked about the dreams he'd had of making it big in the city, of proving to everyone, and to himself, that he could be more than just a small-town kid. But mostly, Michael admitted, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was scared. Scared of failing you, of not living up to your expectations. You worked so hard for me, Mom, and I felt like I was just drifting. So I convinced myself that leaving was the best thing for both of us." Sarah listened, her heart breaking anew as she realized the pain her son had been carrying all these years. She wanted to reach out, to take his hand and tell him that he never needed to prove anything to her, that her love had always been unconditional. But there was more to hear, and so she remained silent, allowing Michael to continue his tale. He told her of his early years in New York City, of sleeping on friends' couches and working odd jobs just to make ends meet. There were moments of excitement and adventure, but also long nights of loneliness and regret. Michael had tried his hand at various careers, bartending, sales, even a brief stint as a struggling actor, but nothing seemed to stick. And all the while, he said, his eyes meeting Sarah's for the first time since he began his story, I thought about you. About this town. About the life I'd left behind. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back. How could I face you after disappearing like that? Sarah felt a mix of emotion swirling within her, sympathy for the struggles her son had faced, anger at the years they had lost, and a profound sadness for the pain they had both endured. But overshadowing it all was a sense of relief. Her son was here, alive and well, sitting across from her after all this time. Oh, Michael, she finally said, her voice thick with unshed tears. You could have come home at any time. I would have welcomed you with open arms. Michael's eyes glistened as he reached across the table, hesitantly taking his mother's hand. I know that now, Mom. And I can't tell you how sorry I am for staying away so long. I've missed so much, your birthdays, holidays, just life. Can you ever forgive me? Sarah looked at their joined hands, her own, wrinkled and spotted with age, and Michael's, strong but bearing the marks of hard work and time. In that moment, she made a decision that would change both their lives. Michael, she said softly, forgiveness isn't just something I can give you. It's a journey we'll have to take together. But I'm willing to try if you are. The relief on Michael's face was palpable. I am, Mom. I want to make things right between us, to be a part of your life again, if you'll have me. As they continued to talk, the initial awkwardness began to melt away. They shared stories, Sarah telling Michael about the changes in their hometown over the years, and Michael filling in the gaps of his life away. There were moments of laughter and tears, of rediscovering the bond that had once seemed unbreakable. As the lunch crowd began to filter into the diner, Sarah realized they had been talking for hours. She was about to suggest they continue their conversation elsewhere when Michael suddenly sat up straighter, a familiar glint in his eye that she remembered from his childhood, the look he got when an idea struck him. Mom, he said, excitement creeping into his voice, do you still bake? Sarah couldn't help but chuckle. Of course I do. These old hands might be a bit slower, but they still know their way around a kitchen. Michael leaned forward, his words tumbling out in a rush. I've been thinking. I know I have a lot to make up for, and this might sound crazy, but what if we opened a bakery together? Sarah blinked, taken aback by the sudden proposal. A bakery? Michael, that's a big undertaking. And you've been gone so long. I know, Michael said, holding up his hands. But hear me out. You've always been the best baker in town. And I've picked up some business skills over the years. I think we could make a great team. It would give us a chance to spend time together, to really get to know each other again. What do you say? Sarah sat back, considering the idea. It was true that she had always dreamed of opening her own bakery, but life and circumstances had always gotten in the way. And now, at 80 years old, was it too late to chase that dream? But as she looked at Michael's eager face, she felt a spark of something she hadn't experienced in years, hope. Hope for a new beginning, for a chance to rebuild the relationship she had thought was lost forever. Well, she said slowly, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth, I suppose it's never too late to try something new. But Michael, are you sure about this? Opening a business together is a big commitment. Michael nodded emphatically. I've never been more sure of anything, Mom. I want to make up for lost time, and I can't think of a better way to do it than by helping you achieve your dream. And so, with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, Sarah and Michael began to plan. They spent the next few weeks scouting locations, drawing up business plans, and most importantly, baking together in Sarah's small kitchen. It was during these baking sessions that they truly began to reconnect, falling into an easy rhythm as they kneaded dough and swapped stories. Sarah taught Michael the secret family recipes that had been passed down through generations, and he shared with her some of the exotic flavors he'd encountered in his travels. There were moments of frustration, Michael's impatience sometimes clashing with Sarah's meticulous methods, but there was also laughter, and the joy of creating something together. As word spread through the small town that Sarah Thompson was opening a bakery with her long-lost son, reactions were mixed. Some were thrilled at the prospect of having Sarah's famous pies and cookies readily available. Others were more skeptical, whispering about Michael's mysterious past and questioning whether he could be trusted. Sarah found herself having to defend her son more than once, assuring her friends and neighbors that people could change, that everyone deserved a second chance. But there were moments, late at night, when doubt would creep in. Was she being foolish, pinning her hopes on this new venture? Could she truly trust Michael not to disappear again? These doubts came to a head one evening, about a month into their preparations. They had been working late, trying to perfect a new recipe, when a small disagreement over the amount of sugar needed escalated into a full-blown argument. "You're not listening to me, Michael," Sarah exclaimed, frustration evident in her voice. "This recipe has been in our family for generations. You can't just change it on a whim." Michael threw up his hands in exasperation. "Mom, I'm just trying to update it a little. Make it appeal to a younger crowd. Why are you so resistant to change?" The word change hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes as she turned away, busying herself with cleaning up the kitchen. "Maybe this was a mistake," she said softly, her back to Michael. "Maybe we're just too different now." There was a moment of heavy silence before Sarah felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Michael looking at her with a mixture of remorse and determination. "No, Mom," he said firmly. "This isn't a mistake. We're going to have disagreements, that's normal. But I'm not going anywhere this time. I promise." As they stood there in the flour-dusted kitchen, the air thick with the scent of vanilla and cinnamon, Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't forgiveness, not quite yet, that would take more time. But it was a step in the right direction, a willingness to believe that this time could be different. The weeks leading up to the grand opening of Sweet Reconciliations, the name they had chosen for their bakery, were a whirlwind of activity. There were permits to obtain, equipment to install, and an endless list of details to attend to. But through it all, Sarah and Michael worked side by side, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Finally, the big day arrived. As Sarah stood behind the counter, surveying the warm, inviting space they had created together, she felt a sense of pride and accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced before. The walls were painted a soft yellow, reminiscent of fresh butter, and the air was filled with the mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked goods. Michael appeared at her side, looking dapper in a crisp white shirt and a bow tie that matched the bakery's logo. "Ready, Mom?" he asked, offering his arm. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing down her apron. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking his arm. As they walked to the front door together, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Just a few months ago, she had been a lonely old woman, resigned to spending her remaining years alone with her memories. Now, here she was, about to embark on a new adventure with the son she had thought lost to her forever. The bell above the door chimed as Michael unlocked it, and suddenly the bakery was flooded with people. It seemed as if the entire town had turned out for the grand opening. Sarah found herself enveloped in hugs and congratulations, her eyes misting over at the outpouring of support from her community. As the day wore on, Sarah and Michael worked in perfect harmony, churning out tray after tray of cookies, pies, and pastries. The cash register chimed merrily, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was everything Sarah had ever dreamed of and more. But just as the day was winding down, and Sarah was beginning to think they had pulled off a perfect opening, disaster struck. A group of teenagers, horsing around near the display case, accidentally knocked it over. The crash of shattering glass and the sight of their beautiful creation strewn across the floor seemed to bring everything to a standstill. For a moment, Sarah felt as if she were watching the scene from outside her body. She saw Michael's face contort with anger, saw him start to move toward the frightened teenagers with clenched fists. In that instant, she was transported back 30 years, to the night before Michael had left, the night of their biggest fight, when harsh words had been exchanged and bridges had been burned. Without thinking, Sarah stepped between Michael and the teens. "It's all right," she said soothingly, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence of the bakery. "Accidents happen. Why don't you boys help us clean this up? The tension in the room dissipated as quickly as it had built. The teenagers, looking relieved and a little sheepish, immediately began helping to sweep up the broken glass. Other customers pitched in as well, and soon the mess was cleaned up. As Sarah turned to Michael, she saw a myriad of emotions play across his face: anger, frustration, and then, finally, a rueful smile. "You always did know how to diffuse a situation, Mom," he said softly. "I guess some things never change." That night, after they had closed up shop and were sitting in Sarah's living room, exhausted but exhilarated, Michael suddenly grew serious. "Mom," he said, his voice hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you. About why I really left all those years ago." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She had always assumed she knew the reasons: Michael's restlessness, his desire to see the world. But the look on his face told her there was more to the story. Michael took a deep breath and began to speak. He told her about the night before he left, how he had overheard a conversation between Sarah and her sister. Sarah had been crying, talking about how hard it was to make ends meet, how she was struggling to pay for Michael's college applications. "I felt like such a burden," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "I convinced myself that you'd be better off without me, that I was holding you back from living your own life. So I left, thinking I was doing the right thing. But I was wrong, Mom. So wrong." Sarah sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. All these years, she had carried the weight of Michael's departure, blaming herself for not being enough, for somehow driving him away. And all along, he had been carrying his own burden of guilt and misguided good intentions. "Oh, Michael," she finally managed to say, reaching out to take his hand. "You were never a burden. You were my joy, my reason for everything. I would have worked 100 jobs if it meant giving you opportunities. I wish you had talked to me." Michael nodded, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I know that now. And I'm so sorry, Mom. For everything. For all the years we lost." In that moment, as they sat hand in hand in the warm glow of the table lamp, Sarah felt the last of her reservations melt away. The path to forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a straight line. It was a winding road, full of unexpected turns and challenging climbs. But they were on that road together now, and that was what mattered. The next few months were a whirlwind of activity as sweet reconciliations became a staple of the community. Word spread about the delicious treats and the heartwarming story behind the bakery, and soon they were attracting customers from neighboring towns as well. Sarah found herself busier than she had been in years, but it was a good kind of busy. She loved the early mornings in the kitchen, working alongside Michael to prepare for the day ahead. She loved the conversations with regular customers, the joy on children's faces as they pressed their noses against the display case, and the satisfaction of seeing empty plates and contented smiles. But more than anything, she loved watching Michael flourish. He had taken to the business side of things with a passion, coming up with creative marketing ideas and building relationships with local suppliers. And when he was in the kitchen, there was a peace about him that Sarah had never seen before. One quiet afternoon, as they were experimenting with a new recipe, Sarah found herself studying Michael's profile as he concentrated on measuring ingredients. The lines around his eyes, which she had once thought were etched by hardship, now seemed to be laugh lines. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there when he first returned. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" Michael asked, catching her gaze. Sarah smiled, reaching out to brush a smudge of flour from his cheek. "I was just thinking about how grateful I am. For this bakery, for this second chance, for you." Michael's eyes softened. "I'm the grateful one, Mom. You didn't have to forgive me, didn't have to give me another chance. But you did, and it's changed everything." As they stood there in the warm, sweet-smelling kitchen, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The past 30 years hadn't been erased, nothing could do that. But they were building something new, something beautiful, out of the broken pieces of their past. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a customer, and Sarah and Michael shared a smile before moving to the front of the shop. As they greeted the customer together, Sarah couldn't help but think that sometimes life's sweetest moments come after the bitterest disappointments. And that forgiveness, like the perfect recipe, takes time, patience, and a whole lot of love to get just right. In the months that followed, Sweet Reconciliations became more than just a bakery. It became a symbol of hope and second chances for the entire community. People would come not just for the delicious treats, but to bask in the warmth of Sarah and Michael's relationship, to witness the power of forgiveness firsthand. One day, as Sarah was closing up shop, she noticed a young woman lingering by the door, looking hesitant. "Can I help you, dear?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle. The woman, who couldn't have been more than 25, twisted her hands nervously. I've been coming here for weeks, trying to work up the courage to talk to you," she said. "My mom and we haven't spoken in years. I made some bad choices, said some terrible things. But seeing you and your son, it's made me think that maybe it's not too late for us either." Sarah felt her heart swell with emotion. She reached out and took the young woman's hand. "It's never too late, sweetheart. The first step is always the hardest, but it's worth taking. Trust me on that." As the woman left, wiping tears from her eyes but with a new determination in her step, Sarah felt a profound sense of purpose. She and Michael weren't just baking pies and cookies, they were serving up hope, one slice at a time. That night, as they sat on Sarah's porch, enjoying the cool evening breeze, Michael turned to his mother with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Mom, I've been thinking. Maybe we could do more with the bakery. Use it as a way to help others who are trying to reconcile with their families." Sarah raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Michael's eyes lit up as he explained his idea. They could host workshops on forgiveness and reconciliation, offer a safe space for estranged family members to meet and talk. They could even partner with local counselors to provide resources for those who needed extra support. As Sarah listened to Michael's enthusiastic plans, she felt a surge of pride. This was so much more than she had ever imagined when she first opened that letter all those months ago. They weren't just rebuilding their own relationship, they were creating ripples of healing that spread far beyond their little bakery. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Michael," she said, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Sweet Reconciliations indeed." And so, as the seasons changed and another year rolled around, Sarah found herself celebrating her 81st birthday in a way she never could have imagined. The bakery was closed for the day, but it was far from empty. It was filled with laughter, with the aroma of Sarah's famous birthday cake, and with people whose lives had been touched by the story of a mother's forgiveness and a son's return. As Sarah looked around at the gathered faces, friends old and new, customers who had become like family, and of course, Michael by her side, she felt a sense of completeness that had eluded her for so long. The road hadn't been easy, and there were still challenges ahead. But with every shared smile, every moment of understanding, every small act of forgiveness, they were creating something truly sweet. And as Michael led everyone in a rousing rendition of Happy Birthday, Sarah closed her eyes and made a wish. Not for herself, but for all those out there still struggling to find their way back to love and forgiveness. May they find the strength to take that first step, to open their hearts, and to discover that it's never too late for a new beginning. The story of Sarah and Michael Thompson, of Sweet Reconciliations, was far from over. But with each passing day, with each batch of cookies baked and each hand held in support, they were writing a new chapter, one of hope, healing, and the enduring power of love. As the party wound down and the last guests departed, Sarah found herself alone with Michael in the bakery. They stood side by side, looking out at the darkening street, the glow from the shop window casting a warm light around them. "Thank you, Mom," Michael said softly. "For everything." Sarah turned to her son, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "No, Michael. Thank you. For coming home, for giving us this chance. For showing me that it's never too late to start again." As they embraced, the scent of sugar and cinnamon swirling around them, Sarah knew that this moment, this love, was the sweetest recipe of all. And so, dear viewers, as we come to the end of this tale, we leave Sarah and Michael Thompson not at an ending, but at a new beginning. Their story reminds us that forgiveness is not just a gift we give to others, but also to ourselves. It shows us that even the deepest wounds can heal, given time and love. But what do you think? Has this story of sweet reconciliations touched your heart? Are you perhaps thinking of your own relationships, wondering if there's a bridge that needs rebuilding in your life? Remember, it's never too late to take that first step. If you've enjoyed this journey with Sarah and Michael, why not subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of love, forgiveness, and second chances? And who knows, maybe the next story will be about you. Until next time, keep your hearts open, your spirit sweet, and remember, life, like baking, is all about the ingredients you choose to put in. So choose love, choose forgiveness, and watch as something beautiful rises from the oven of your experiences. This is your storyteller, signing off. May your days be filled with sweetness, and may you always find the courage to reconcile what's been broken. After all, the most delicious treats often come from recipes that seemed impossible at first glance. Sweet dreams, dear viewers, and don't forget to sprinkle a little forgiveness into your life. Who knows? It might just be the secret ingredient you've been missing all along. As the weeks turned into months, and the seasons changed from the crisp autumn to the snowy winter, Sarah and Michael's bakery continued to flourish. The warmth emanating from sweet reconciliation seemed to defy the cold outside, drawing people in with its promise of comfort and connection. One particularly frosty morning, as Sarah was arranging a tray of freshly baked cinnamon rolls in the display case, she noticed a familiar face peering through the window. It was Tom Henderson, the town's gruff old mechanic who had been a fixture in the community for as long as anyone could remember. Sarah had known Tom for decades, but in recent years he had become increasingly reclusive, rarely venturing out beyond his garage. Curious, Sarah watched as Tom hesitated at the door, his weathered hand hovering over the handle. Just as it seemed he might turn away, Michael emerged from the kitchen, a steaming mug of coffee in hand. "Why don't you invite him in, Mom?" Michael suggested, nodding towards Tom. "Looks like he could use some warming up." Sarah nodded, making her way to the door and opening it with a warm smile. "Tom Henderson, as I live and breathe. Come on in out of that cold." Tom shuffled in, stamping the snow from his boots. "Morning, Sarah," he mumbled, his eyes darting around the cozy interior of the bakery. "Heard about this place. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about." As Sarah ushered Tom to a table near the fireplace, she couldn't help but notice the way his gaze lingered on Michael, who was busy serving other customers. There was something in Tom's expression, a mixture of recognition and regret, that piqued Sarah's curiosity. Over the next hour, as Tom slowly sipped his coffee and nibbled on a blueberry muffin, Sarah engaged him in gentle conversation. She talked about the bakery, about the weather, about the upcoming town festival. And gradually, Tom began to open up. "You know," he said, his voice gruff but tinged with emotion, "seeing you and your boy working together like this, it reminds me of what I lost." Sarah leaned in, her heart aching at the pain in Tom's eyes. "What do you mean, Tom?" Tom sighed, setting down his mug. "I had a son too, you know. Bright kid, full of big dreams. But I was too hard on him. Pushed him away with my stubbornness. He left town 20 years ago, and I haven't heard from him since." As Tom's story unfolded, Sarah felt a deep sense of déjà vu. The parallels between Tom's situation and her own past with Michael were striking. But where she and Michael had found their way back to each other, Tom was still lost in the wilderness of estrangement. "Have you ever thought about reaching out to him?" Sarah asked gently. Tom shook his head, his eyes downcast. "Wouldn't know where to start. Besides, after all this time, he probably doesn't want to hear from me." It was at that moment that Michael approached the table, having overheard the last part of the conversation. "Mr. Henderson," he said, pulling up a chair, "if you don't mind me saying, it's never too late. I should know." And there, in the warm glow of the fireplace, with the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air, Michael shared his own story of leaving and returning. He spoke of the years of regret, the fear of rejection, and finally, the incredible gift of forgiveness and reconciliation. As Tom listened, his eyes growing misty, Sarah marveled at the change in her son. The Michael of old would have shied away from such personal revelations. But this Michael, tempered by time and softened by love, spoke with a quiet confidence and compassion that filled her with pride. When Michael finished speaking, Tom sat in silence for a long moment. Then, with a trembling hand, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered old wallet. From it, he extracted a faded photograph of a young man with Tom's eyes and a wide, hopeful smile. "This is my boy," Tom said, his voice barely above a whisper. "His name's Jack. Last I heard, he was living out in California. Do you really think it's not too late?" Sarah and Michael exchanged a glance, a world of understanding passing between them. "It's never too late for love, Tom," Sarah said softly, placing her hand over his. "Never too late for forgiveness." In that moment, a spark of hope ignited in Tom's eyes, a spark that had been dormant for far too long. And as Sarah and Michael began to help Tom draft a letter to his long-lost son, they realized that Sweet Reconciliations was becoming more than just a bakery. It was becoming a place of healing, a catalyst for mending broken relationships and nurturing new beginnings. Over the next few weeks, Tom became a regular at the bakery. He'd sit by the fireplace, nursing a cup of coffee and working on his letter to Jack. Sometimes he'd ask Sarah or Michael for advice on what to say, other times he'd just sit in contemplative silence, surrounded by the comforting bustle of the bakery. One day, as Sarah was closing up shop, she noticed Tom lingering by the counter, an envelope clutched tightly in his hand. "I did it," he said, his voice a mixture of pride and trepidation. "I finished the letter. But I'm not sure I have the courage to mail it." Sarah came around the counter and gave Tom's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. "Would you like us to mail it for you?" she offered. Sometimes, taking that first step is the hardest part. Tom nodded gratefully, handing over the envelope with shaking hands. As Sarah took it, she felt the weight of hope and fear it contained, emotions she knew all too well. That night, as she and Michael walked to the post office together to mail Tom's letter, Sarah found herself reflecting on the incredible journey that had led them to this moment. A year ago, she had been a lonely old woman, resigned to spending her remaining years alone with her memories. Now, here she was, not only reunited with her son, but also helping others find their way back to love and forgiveness. "You know, Mom," Michael said as they walked arm in arm through the quiet streets, "I've been thinking. Maybe we could do more of this, helping people reconnect with their estranged family members." Sarah looked up at her son, intrigued. "What did you have in mind?" Michael's eyes lit up with excitement as he outlined his idea. "We could set up a little corner in the bakery, call it the Reconciliation Station, or something like that. We could have resources there, maybe partner with a family counselor. People could come in, have a coffee, and get support if they're thinking about reaching out to someone they've lost touch with." As Michael continued to elaborate on his vision, Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the chilly night air. This was so much more than she had ever dreamed of when she first opened that letter from Michael all those months ago. They weren't just rebuilding their own relationship, they were creating ripples of healing that spread far beyond their little bakery. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Michael," she said, squeezing his arm affectionately. "Sweet reconciliations indeed." Over the next few months, Michael's idea took shape. They cleared out a cozy corner of the bakery, stocking it with books on forgiveness and reconciliation, contact information for local counselors, and even a small writing desk where people could work on letters to their estranged loved ones. The Reconciliation Station, as it came to be known, quickly became a popular feature of the bakery. People would come in, order a cup of coffee or a slice of pie, and spend time browsing the resources or talking quietly with Sarah or Michael about their situations. It wasn't always easy. Some days, Sarah found herself comforting tearful customers as they grappled with years of hurt and resentment. Other days, she and Michael would celebrate with those who had taken the brave step of reaching out and had received positive responses. Through it all, Sarah marveled at the transformation in her son. The Michael who had returned to her a year ago, full of guilt and uncertainty, had blossomed into a compassionate, confident man. He had a gift for putting people at ease, for listening without judgment, and for offering gentle encouragement when it was needed most. As for Tom Henderson, his story was still unfolding. Weeks had passed since they mailed his letter, and there had been no response from his son Jack. But Tom continued to come to the bakery every day, his hope never quite extinguished. Then, on a bright spring morning, just as Sarah was pulling a tray of lemon tarts from the oven, the bell above the door chimed. She looked up to see Tom entering the bakery, but this time he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a tall, middle-aged man with Tom's eyes and a hesitant smile. "Sarah," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'd like you to meet my son, Jack. He came home." As Sarah watched Tom and Jack take a seat by the fireplace, their conversation awkward but filled with tentative hope, she felt a sense of completion she had never experienced before. This moment, this connection, was what Sweet Reconciliations was all about. Later that evening, as she and Michael were cleaning up after closing, Sarah found herself humming softly, her heart full of joy. "What's got you in such a good mood, Mom?" Michael asked, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Sarah paused in her sweeping, leaning on the broom as she considered the question. "You know," she said slowly, "I've been thinking about something my grandmother used to say. She always told me that the secret to a good life was like the secret to good baking, it's all about the right ingredients, mixed with love and patience." Michael nodded, encouraging her to continue. "For so long," Sarah went on, "I thought I was missing a crucial ingredient. I had my baking, I had my friends in town, but without you, the recipe of my life just felt incomplete." She reached out, taking Michael's hand in hers. "But now, with you here, with this bakery, with all the lives we're touching, I feel like I've finally got all the right ingredients. And the thing we're creating together, it's so much sweeter than anything I could have made on my own." Michael's eyes glistened with unshed tears as he pulled his mother into a tight embrace. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. "Thank you for giving us, this second chance." As they stood there in the quiet bakery, the lingering sense of sugar and cinnamon swirling around them, Sarah knew that this love, this forgiveness, this sweet reconciliation, was the most perfect recipe of all. And so, dear viewers, as we come to the end of this chapter in Sarah and Michael's story, we leave them not at an ending, but at a new beginning. Their journey reminds us that it's never too late to mend what's broken, to reach out across the chasms that separate us from those we love. But what do you think? Has the story of Sweet Reconciliations touched your heart? Are you perhaps thinking of your own relationships, wondering if there's a bridge that needs rebuilding in your life? Remember, sometimes the first step is the hardest, but it's always worth taking. If you've enjoyed this journey with Sarah and Michael, why not subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales of love, forgiveness, and second chances? And who knows, maybe the next story we share will inspire you to write your own chapter of reconciliation. Until next time, keep your hearts open, your spirits sweet, and remember, life, like baking, is all about the ingredients you choose to put in. So choose love, choose forgiveness, and watch as something beautiful rises from the oven of your experiences. This is your storyteller, signing off. May your days be filled with sweetness, and may you always find the courage to reconcile what's been broken. After all, the most delicious treats often come from recipes that seemed impossible at first glance. Sweet dreams, dear viewers, and don't forget to sprinkle a little forgiveness into your life. Who knows? It might just be the secret ingredient you've been missing all along.